Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show.
The acts and omissions complained of by the applicant appear to be capable of falling within the provisions of the Genocide Convention. In the court's view, at least some of the acts and omissions alleged by South Africa to have been committed by Israel in Gaza appear to be capable of falling within the provisions of the Convention. In light of the following, the court concludes that, prima facie, it has jurisdiction pursuant to Article 9 of the Convention to entertain the case. Given this conclusion, the court considers that it cannot accede to Israel's request that the case be removed from the general list.
That was the voice of one of the 17 justices who rendered a decision on the case of genocide against Israel brought by South Africa just today, Friday, January 26, 2024, a monumental decision that makes it clear that the evidence brought by South Africa constitutes genocide. And while the court fell short of calling for a ceasefire, which was the express request of South Africa, this decision is monumental in many ways.
This is an amazing ruling because it highlights everything that the South African team and, of course, Palestinians have been saying the entire time, which is that Israel is plausibly carrying out genocide. And so the fact that the court has indicated to Israel that they have to take measures to prevent genocide, to make sure that soldiers are doing the same, to prosecute those individuals who are inciting, including high government officials, and ensure that there is effective humanitarian aid is precisely what was sought by Palestinians. It's now up to the world to make sure that this court ruling is actually enacted.
That was the voice of Diana Butu being interviewed by Democracy Now!, outlining the significance of this case. I want to play for you now sound from South African Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor.
I believe that in exercising the order, there would have to be a ceasefire. Without it, the order doesn't actually work. I would have wanted a ceasefire. No, they didn't.
Are you disappointed
but how,
that they didn't specify that?
I have no way that I'm going to say I'm disappointed. I hoped for it, but the fact of delivering humanitarian aid, the fact of taking measures that reduce the levels of harm against persons who have no role in what Israel is combating, for me requires a ceasefire. And I believe Israel would have to attend to how it conducts its search for the hostages and for those Hamas individuals who carried out the October 7 attack.
So South Africa was simultaneously successful in a historic fashion, able to get the charge of genocide to stand, and Israel unable to get the case dismissed. Here was a response from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the decision made by the International Court of Justice.
Commitment to international law is unwavering. Equally unwavering is our sacred commitment to continue to defend our country and defend our people. Like every country, Israel has an inherent right to defend itself. The vile attempt to deny Israel this fundamental right is blatant discrimination against the Jewish state, and it was justly rejected. The charge of genocide leveled against Israel is not only false, it's outrageous, and decent people everywhere should reject it. On the eve of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, I again pledge as Israel's Prime Minister, never again. Israel will continue to defend itself against Hamas, a genocidal terror organization. On October 7th, Hamas perpetrated the most horrific atrocities against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and it vows to repeat these atrocities again and again and again. Our war is against Hamas terrorists, not against Palestinian civilians. We will continue to facilitate humanitarian assistance.
That's all I could take of that. His war most certainly is against Palestinian civilians. As you can see, we have crossed 13,000 children who have been killed in the retaliatory strikes from Benjamin Netanyahu and his far right-wing government that is in control, that has seized power in Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu is still under investigation for fraud. That trial was put on hold because of the Hamas attack on October 7th, for which Benjamin Netanyahu had previous and prior intelligence from Egyptian intelligence, letting him know, telling him that there was an impending attack. Yet Benjamin Netanyahu did nothing about it. And there he stands in his so-called righteous indignation, trying to reuse and recycle October 7th over and over and over again, as though there is nothing to compare October 7th with since October 7th. What I mean is this: for them to continuously use October 7th to justify a slaughter of Palestinians that far exceeds anything that happened on October 7th is not only disingenuous and bad faith, but it is a sign of gaslighting of the highest order. To continuously try to tell the world that we should look to October 7th and ignore everything that has happened to the Palestinian people since October 7th. Some 30,000 people killed, war crimes, individuals with white flags in their hands being shot by snipers, 2,000-pound bombs being dropped on residential centers, over 116 journalists killed, many in their home. Not to mention the fact that this is being driven by artificial intelligence. So I want you to pause for a moment and just consider the intentionality you must have to strike a journalist in their home using artificial intelligence to justify that killing of a journalist. It's the same absurdity and barbarity of a sniper, of an IDF sniper, Israeli Defense Force sniper, looking through his scope and shooting women and men waving white flags, killing them in cold blood. If this isn't a genocide, I don't know what is. If these are not war crimes, then there is no such thing as war crimes. And the international community is not falling for Benjamin Netanyahu's routine. We know very clearly what our eyes have shown us. A level of barbarity that quite honestly has been one of the main reasons I can't do the podcast regularly. I just can't. Because to have to consider and look at and digest, and then not only digest it, which I do, you can't help but see it every day, right? You digest this. You see thousands of bodies come across your social media feed. You see children with their brains literally splattered on the ground. You see children with white flags and then their mothers carrying white flags, but the mother gets shot as they're carrying white flags. This was reported on by CNN, right? You could see the footage. You could see the hospitals being bombed. They want us to not believe our eyes, but they want us to take their word for it, that what we should do as an international community is to always reset our clocks to October 7th, but completely ignore the barbarity of Benjamin Netanyahu that has been rained down on the Palestinian people since. May God visit upon Benjamin Netanyahu the same mercy and the same grace that he gives the children of the Palestinian people. We'll be back with more of the Benjamin Dixon Show after this.
Look, I'm in line with the stars, I'm in sync with the earth. 10 toes deep, flower child from the turf. I never switch sides, like even when I die, I'ma ride for the squad, light up ties in the hearse. I've been on a vibe, kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in the middle of the time of my life. I'm never so packed for the stack, never lied on the rap, got a bag from the way that I write it. Queen looking Tyson.
Welcome back to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
At least 25 Republican governors have joined with Texas Governor Greg Abbott to foment the next step towards the second American Civil War. And while this may seem as hyperbole, if you are paying attention to the rhetoric that's coming out of the mouths of Republican leaders, from Republican and conservative influencers, and just the masses, generally speaking. Conservatives are excited about this moment in history where they get an opportunity to attempt the second American Civil War. They're saying it in very plain language. I've covered it before with many of the influencers. You can go find it for yourself. I want to read for you what Donald Trump put out to all of his supporters via Truth Social, because I need folks to understand exactly the caliber of man that we're dealing with. In this contrived constitutional crisis that has been brought about by Greg Abbott, Donald Trump has seized this as an opportunity to advance himself at the expense of the American people. Matter of fact, at the expense of the entirety of the American democratic experiment. Here's what he said on Truth Social. He said, quote, "When I was president, we had the most secure border in history. Joe Biden has surrendered our border and is aiding and abetting a massive invasion of millions of illegal migrants into the United States. Instead of fighting to protect our country from this onslaught, Biden is, unbelievably, fighting to tie the hands of Governor Abbott and the state of Texas so that the invasion continues unchecked. In the face of this national security, public safety, and public health catastrophe, Texas has rightly invoked the invasion clause of the Constitution and must be given full support to repeal the invasion." He went on, page 2. "We encourage all willing states to deploy their guards to Texas to prevent entry of illegals and to remove them back across the border. All Americans should support the common sense measures by Texas authorities to protect the safety, security, and sovereignty of Texas and the American people. When I am president, on day one, instead of fighting Texas, I will work hand in hand with Governor Abbott and the border states to stop the invasion, seal the border, and rapidly begin the largest domestic deportation operation in history. Those Biden has let in should not get comfortable because they will be going home." In every way imaginable, Donald Trump is making it clear that he has intentions of destroying American democracy, and to do so through the energy that he can foment through this border crisis. And I put crisis in quotations because there is quite a bit of debate and argument over whether or not this constitutes a crisis. And furthermore, if it constitutes a crisis in the magnitude and the order that Republicans are using it. Greg Abbott's letter to the president of the United States outlining why he is going to ignore the Supreme Court decision to remove the barbed wire. Okay, let me slow down and just give you that backdrop. The Supreme Court decision gave federal authorities to remove the barbed wire that was placed at the border by Texas National Guard members because that was preventing federal agents from being able to do their job. This is the order from the Supreme Court that Greg Abbott is ignoring. And this is the order that Donald Trump is inflaming. This situation is what Donald Trump is inflaming to further his own personal self-aggrandizement, to help his election campaign, because he knows this is the red meat that his base needs and loves. They love nothing more than the idea of a second civil war, because most of Donald Trump's supporters come from the lost cause neo-Confederacy. These states that are so committed to their attack on marginalized communities, on their attack on diversity and inclusion, the same states that are attacking blackness, calling it wokeness. These are the same states who have sent their National Guard troops to Texas to create a confrontation with federal authorities. This is precisely what conservative leaders are calling for. Conservative influencers and politicians, even conservative preachers and pastors, they are inflaming the possibility and the potentiality of actual conflict, kinetic, hot war on the border. Take a listen to this clip from Newsmax, where a Republican governor entertains very directly the idea of this instant, this flashpoint that is being inflamed by Donald Trump, They're talking about it now just widely and publicly as a prelude to a second civil war.
That Joe Biden should or may actually federalize the National Guard, take that power away from Greg Abbott. Let's say this showdown, that's what it is. It's a showdown. It's a showdown of power and loyalties and constitutionality. Let's say he does that. How many people say, no, you know what, screw you, Biden administration, and how many people stay and fight with Texas versus the federal things, and does that put us on course for a force-on-force conflict?
I mean, right now you've got the federal agents that are cutting the wire, and then you've got the Texas National Guard on orders to put up wire. I mean, this is a powder keg worth of tension. So it's it's a very weird situation. We certainly stand with Texas on their right to defend themselves, but Biden's going to be in a tough situation. Mm-hmm. So in other words, he's going to try to federalize these troops. In other words, put them on federal orders. And so now their allegiance technically goes to the president of the United States instead of the governor. And of course, I think a lot of Texans, these are still, they're still Texans that are weekend, they're in a National Guards. They do 1 week in a month or when they get called up on duties by the governor. Mm-hmm. And I think they would be in a difficult situation to protect their homeland or to follow what Biden's saying.
Literally open it.
Very interesting. But then, then you've got Oklahoma and Florida and Tennessee, and you got all these other states that would send our National Guard to help and to support the efforts of Governor Abbott. Because every state is a border state. You talked about fentanyl. The deaths in Oklahoma since I've taken office are up 500%. And we know that's coming across the southern border. And then you think about the terrorists. Again, I just don't know what their end game is here, and I hope American people really wake up to what's happening.
That was Republican Governor Kevin Stitt of Oklahoma, just one of the 25 Republican governors who have aligned with Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Folks, they want civil war. There's really just no other way to describe it. Take a listen to Fox News as a Republican congressperson says as much.
What do you make of the idea of all of these states sending the National Guard troops down there? Governor Kristi Noem has already said, yeah, I'll do it. I mean, but that would just be, I'm just wondering how that would play out and what the optics of that would be. It'd be very controversial, obviously, if it happens.
The whole issue is controversial, and this is where I think President Biden failed from the inception when he incentivized illegal immigration, when he took steps, over 60 steps, this administration, to thwart efforts to curtail the illegal immigration and to secure the border. Now he says he wants to secure it. That's only because radical left-wing mayors have finally in the North have basically realized that their sanctuary cities are sinking them financially. Yeah. So will it be controversial? Yes, but we've got to do something. The country needs to stand up. Governor Abbott has really taken a position, again, of courage and to stand up where this administration is going to continue to do nothing and try to placate their radical left-wing allies. Their policies have failed. They're going to continue to fail. And what's worse, our country is now no longer secure. This is a national security crisis. It's a fentanyl crisis. It's a financial crisis. It's a horrific crisis. So kudos to Governor Abbott and the other governors who are going to stand up. Yeah. America no longer wants illegal immigration.
Yet another Republican endorsing civil war. This is Tennessee Representative Chuck Fleischman endorsing red states sending their National Guards to the border to protect Texas. Here's what's important. Protect them from what? And from whom? Fathers and mothers bringing their children across the border who died because of the barbed wire, because federal authorities couldn't get to them to help save their lives or to deport them or whatever. They died. So this is who these 25 governors are sending their National Guardsmen over to protect Texas. But I want you to watch an inflection that is going to quickly be made very soon. They are going to shift this from the National Guard going there from 25 states going to Texas in order to protect Texas from fentanyl and from migrants. And very quickly, it's going to turn into protecting Texas from federal authorities. And that, my friends, is when these Republicans who are trying their best to start a second civil war, because they are rooted in the lost cause ideology of the Confederacy, They have even identified themselves as the neo-Confederates. According to conservative commentator Tim Pool, they are the neo-Confederates. They have been promoting and salivating at an opportunity to destabilize the United States of America in any form or fashion. And when January 6th didn't work, they have found their new cudgel because they have Republican governors who want to play as though they are commanders in chief and send their National Guards over to Texas for a confrontation that is highly contrived and manufactured, because even the legality, the constitutionality of Greg Abbott's claims are frivolous and fallacious. I'm going to do an entire video breaking down, there's several on my page already, but I'm going to do more, breaking down the fact that we're headed into a second civil war over false equivalences, whataboutisms, fallacies. We are literally being led into a second civil war by the mediocrity and the disingenuousness and the bad faith of conservative white men and the people who love them and support them, who have nothing better to do than to contrive in their minds, to create in their minds the figment of their imagination, the boogeymen of all of the migrant families trying to cross the border. They label them all as military-aged men. Yeah, so anyone between 18 and 35 is a military-aged man. I had children at 30. Most of the people coming to this country are bringing their children. They're escaping American foreign policy, by the way. If you want to not have an influx of people into the empire, perhaps the empire should stop bombing nations. Perhaps we should stop destabilizing nations, particularly in the global South and Latin America. Maybe our foreign policy should change so we don't destabilize nations. But that's a layer of thinking that requires more than just a visceral reaction. America is run off of visceral reactions. They don't want you to have time enough to stop and reflect and think, maybe there's more to this. No, they want you to be able to find someone that you can hate, like immigrants, and say they're the reason you're going through what you're going through. Not inflation that was caused by corporate greed, according to all reports from last year. No, migrants who are trying to escape the destabilized nations that were destabilized because of American foreign policy. They're trying to do the same thing that I would do. Get my family and my kids and get to the safest place I possibly could, which at this point, one of the few places on the face of the planet that is not mired in violence is inside of the United States of America. But don't worry, folks, Republicans are going to take care of that real quickly so that we can have the same level of violence inside of the United States that America creates outside of the United States. And who does that benefit? That benefits authoritarians. That benefits people like Vladimir Putin. That benefits people like Viktor Orban. That helps, aids, and abets strongmen like Donald Trump, who's not qualified to win the presidency on his own, no. But he can certainly start a second civil war, especially when he has Republicans who lap at his feet like puppy dogs. When he has the help of Republican conservatives who have been waiting for a chance to find a way to relitigate the last civil war that they lost. I, for one, am praying very deeply that this doesn't only just blows over, but that we can get to the root of the problem so that we can have peace in this country. And I believe that if we get to the root of the problem, which is a mindset of entitlement, people who are so deranged that if they can't control America, nobody can have her. That's the spirit of the conservative movement. That's the spirit of conservative white men who have the most political power in this country, the most economic power in this country. They have everything they need, finances to retire, to drive around the country in their toy Tonka trucks and go to the Capitol to overthrow it. They have all the time and all the resources in the world, yet they feel like they are the most oppressed, such that they want to start a second civil war. Well, I've been praying about this particular thing. I say, if any of our children have to fight in a future civil war, then every single person who has instigated it and fomented it need to be the very first people on the front lines so that they can reap what they've sown. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel where we're fighting our best against this onslaught against democracy. But we can't do it without you. We'll be back with more of the Benjamin Dixon Show after this.
I went through it outside, they unruly, but I keep it cool, they can't press me. I keep it pure with intention. They see what I'm on, ain't no vixen. I might slide through with that top down. I keep it tuned with a high power. Put it on me, I'm blessed. Blessed. Big bag, manifest the sky, no stress. Keep no evil around me, can't ground me. I built it since when I had less. No hex on, God can't pause. Look at how far we progress. Whatever we do.
Welcome back to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
President Donald Trump has just walked out of a courtroom as E. Jean Carroll's lawyer was making closing arguments in the defamation trial. We're working to get a little bit more detail on this.
Apparently, the judge told the courtroom no one in the courtroom is to say anything. There were apparently some counsel objections. From which side? I assume it was Trump's side. No interruptions, no audible comments is the quote from the judge. So now the plaintiff and the defense were talking about certain tweets not in evidence, possibly to share with the jury. The judge ruled that they are not going to use a certain slide that shows the tweets. And then Trump's attorney, Alina Habba, tried stating that something, quote, just need to state something for the record. The judge interrupted and said, quote, you are on the verge of spending some time in the lockout.
Wow.
Ooh, end quote. So that happened a moment ago, and I'm assuming we will see the caravan pull up to Trump Tower in Midtown Manhattan.
This is just breaking news. Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, has stormed out of his court proceedings during the Jean Carroll defamation trial, where they are now at the deciding point of how much Donald Trump is going to have to pay for defaming Jean Carroll. According to the BBC, Donald Trump has stormed out of his own defamation trial in New York in the middle of closing arguments. The former president has already been found to have defamed writer E. Jean Carroll for comments he made about her in 2019 while he was president. The jury in the case must now decide how much Trump must pay in damages. Now, this is super important because as Donald Trump stormed out, and you'll see momentarily it's described as being childish. He stormed out in this childish manner. This is not going to bode well for him as the jury deliberates how much he must pay for defaming Jean Carroll. Prior to his swift departure, the BBC continues, Mr. Trump was seen shaking his head as lawyer Roberta Kaplan repeatedly brought up that Mr. Trump had sexually assaulted Miss Carroll. Mr. Trump was found liable for the sexual assault in a separate civil trial last year. The judge in the case said the following. He said, quote, the record will reflect that Mr. Trump rose and walked out of the courtroom. Continuing with the article from the BBC, during Ms. Kaplan's closing arguments, she told the court that Ms. Carroll's reputation had been severely harmed by the former president's comments denying he sexually assaulted her. Quote, this case is also about punishing Donald Trump, Ms. Kaplan said, adding, this trial is about getting him to stop once and for all. She said that Mr. Trump had, quote, continued to defame Ms. Carroll even as the trial was ongoing. A civil trial last year found that Mr. Trump had sexually assaulted Ms. Carroll, a magazine columnist, in a New York department store in the 1990s. The jury also found him liable for defamation for calling her accusations a lie, as he was ordered to pay her about $5 million. Despite that ruling, Trump continues to regularly deny any wrongdoing or even knowing Ms. Carroll.
I don't even know who this woman is. I have no idea who she is, where she came from.
Now, again, the jury is getting ready to go into deliberations, and probably by the time you've seen this video, they would have already convened with their deliberations. This is not going to help Donald Trump's case whatsoever. I'm quite sure this petulant behavior will probably push the jury to award E. Jean Carroll with the maximum punitive damages. According to the BBC, the jury will deliberate after Friday's closing arguments, and the pressure of that eventual outcome has caused significant friction in the courtroom. Before the final argument started, Mr. Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba, tried to introduce social media tweets that were not already in evidence, but the judge would not allow it, of course, because the trial is over. They're at the closing arguments. After a fiery back and forth, Judge Kaplan said, "Ms. Habba, you are on the verge of spending some time in the lockup. Now sit down." I had to get that last part in there because it's not just the case of Donald Trump being Donald Trump doing what he did, defaming E. Jean Carroll, but it's also the fact that he has a pretty pathetic attorney working for him. Now, this is the result of Donald Trump not having paid his attorneys previously. And because as Donald Trump got indictment after indictment, attorneys began to ditch him, to fire him, and no longer want to represent him, leaving him with the attorney that he now has. But isn't this just picture perfect when you consider who and what Donald Trump really is? I mean, he is a man who his entire life has never been held accountable for a single thing. None of his actions have brought accountability to him. And so in this late stage of his life, at the pinnacle of his quote unquote achievements, he became the president of the United States. But because he had never been held accountable for anything, he thought he could get away with anything. And as the indictments begin to roll in, he was haunted by all of the things he had done in the past, including the assault against E. Jean Carroll. That came back to bite him. And now he is paying the price, getting ready to literally pay the price when we get the final amount that the jury is going to award E. Jean Carroll. But Donald Trump could not handle sitting down and being held accountable for his actions. Now, tell me, is this the type of human being who is qualified to be anyone's leader, let alone the leader of the United States of America, the most powerful nation on the planet? Absolutely not. Now, we'll discuss later on how Donald Trump is using the situation in Texas to inflame the border crisis that's being manufactured by Greg Abbott. He's using that to inflame the situation, showing very clearly that not only is he willing to use the power of the presidency to get away with anything he wants to do if he was to become president again, he's also clearly willing to destabilize the United States of America beyond repair, right? Beyond the brink. The first 4 years of Donald Trump was really a stress test of whether or not America could survive someone like him being in the presidency. Now they have adapted. They have adjusted their approach, they being not only Donald Trump, but the circle of MAGA that surrounds him. They've adapted and they have responded to the stress test. They know what they can get away with now. They know that they can commit the insurrection and get a slap on the wrist. And as soon as they get out of their 2-month sentence for trying to overthrow the United States of America on January 6th, they're now all lined up to run for office. So please understand, like, the threat of Donald Trump is clearly demonstrated by this particular case. It's clearly demonstrated by his petulant, childish behavior. The threat of Donald Trump goes far beyond just Donald Trump, but it goes to the entire ecosystem that surrounds him, that he has fostered, that he has fomented, the Make America Great Again crowd. They have looked at everything Donald Trump has been able to get away with, and they have used that as a model of how they are going to undermine democracy going forward. In this particular case, Donald Trump is stuck because he's in a trial where he is being held accountable and a jury of his peers is doing the accountability. And so he couldn't stand that. He absolutely hated it. He couldn't sit there and be told that he had done something wrong. Much like a child has to learn to sit still and accept the fact that you have done something wrong, Donald Trump. Not just to E. Jean Carroll, especially to her, because this is what this case today is about. This is the reason he got up and stormed out of the proceeding, but also in the case of the United States of America. No one has ever told him that he was wrong. No one has ever told him that what he is doing is detrimental to someone else. And if he ever heard it, he simply never cared, because all that matters to Donald Trump is the satisfaction and the satiation of his ego. And if anyone has paid attention to life at all whatsoever, you will know that there's no way to pacify the human ego. Donald Trump is using the United States of America to try to test that theory. He's trying to satisfy his ego at the expense of the United States of America. We'll be back with more of the Benjamin Dixon Show after this.
The change I wanna see, if you fight for me, I give you all of me, but I try to be the change I wanna see, if you fight for me, I give you all of me.
Welcome back to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back, folks. Listen, I'm going to go ahead and end today's podcast. We are still in the rebuilding and restructuring phase of the show, mainly because there's just so much I have to share with you. I don't even know where to begin. There's two reasons the show has not been consistent since October, and that is because of October 7th and because of the slaughter of the Palestinian people, the genocide of Gazan children. It's been entirely too much for me to be able to speak about it every day like I used to. I just can't do it. I've spent many hours lamenting, wailing over what I've seen happening. What I did instead of doing the show every day over the last 3 months, going on 4 months, October, November, December, was I poured myself into research and artificial intelligence and the things that I've been able to unearth and unpack, deconstruct using AI, everything from foreign policy to, I don't even want to give the full range. All I can say is that it's a monumental undertaking now just to get the information out to you in a structured format that I can be consistent in. So that's where we are, and that's what we're going to be doing. And slowly but surely, I'm ramping up the payload because there's quite a bit of stuff. There's just so many different angles and perspectives of information that I think is pertinent to what's happening right now today. I'm excited about the stuff I have to share with you, but it has taken its toll. What's happening around the world has pushed me into a place where I need to prioritize not absorbing it as deeply as I did every single day, not because I can't handle it. I can. It's because it pushes me to a place that I don't need to be and is not productive in terms of actually trying to do something about it. And so as we actually try to do something about the problems that we have around this country and this world, it does require that I unplug more from the interwebs and the podcast and really pour myself into the community here locally, into our tribe, my people, Blackness, our lives, right? If you look at what's happening with Black people, you can see that replicated all around the globe. If you look at what's happening around the globe, you see it replicated in what's happening to Black people in this country. So I have poured myself back into my faith, just all the things that are necessary to attempt, right? Because let's be clear, like no matter how much we try to fix and address the things that are happening, at best right now in our lives, most of us can just really just think about it or just talk about it. But if there's ever going to be an attempt to do something about it, it's going to require a lot of hours of organizing and working and planning and strategic effort. We've been doing that for some time now, and we have been organizing, we have been networking, A few years ago, while I was in transition on the show, I took about a year to just travel and work and connect with pastors and preachers around the country because I knew. I mean, you could go back and check the work, check the podcast, check the show about 2 years ago before I went off air. I told us very clearly that this fight is headed towards a fight with Christian nationalism. And because I saw that coming, I was able to do some groundwork and just really reconnect. To be quite honest with you, transparent, I mean, it wasn't difficult to reconnect with the church because, well, I grew up in the church and I pastored before many years before I even started doing this podcast, before I started doing video content. So it was not difficult at all to reconnect with the broader church community and expand, not just locally, but just around the Southeast for sure. And eventually we'll expand that network around the country. The point is this, is that there's a lot being done behind the scenes and we need your support. We need your continued support, whether it is to become a patron, a new patron, whether it is to just renew your patronage and stay on board, whether it's just simply sharing the links, liking and subscribing. There's no doubt, there's plenty of evidence to show that leftists and progressive commentators and YouTubers and podcasters, we have had our content throttled, just completely the door shut. Elon Musk made it clear. He said everyone has a right to free speech, freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. And so you can see that very clearly across social media. The voices of progressives have been shrunken. We have been throttled. But we can beat that. We can beat that if we intentionally, when I say we, you, me, us, we, if we intentionally organize ourselves to amplify the voices of every single progressive commentator that we trust. Not just anybody. We saw that about 3 years ago. You can't just trust anybody who says that they're leftist, but vet them. Vet them to make sure that they are not just a leftist, but a person of good faith. I don't really care. I would be more than happy, quite honest, if I can meet some conservatives who are of good faith, who would look at the truth and change their position based on truth, the way I'm willing to. If I'm wrong about anything that I've said, I will most certainly not only apologize, but I would change my position on it. In the research that I'm doing, most of it is scientific, hard sciences, right? That I went from social sciences and used some theories and structures and frameworks that I'm very familiar with, and most of you probably know about in social sciences. And I was able to make that leap over into the hard sciences because of, anyway, I can't give you too much. I want to say this. If anything I do or share or talk about or suggest does not line up with the truth, objective reality, and when I start dropping these science-based discussions and findings, if anything I do doesn't line up scientifically, I want to take it back, correct myself, and get in line with the truth. I said all of that to say, when you vet people, don't vet them just because of what they say. Oh, I'm a leftist. I'm a progressive. Oh, yeah, I stand for Medicare for all. Okay, cool. When you find out that you're wrong, are you going to change? Because if you're not, it doesn't matter that you're a leftist. You're going to find yourself behaving and engaging in the exact same behaviors that we're trying to save America from right now. That is evident. They have taken over the conservative movement. Folks, I'm almost back. Give me a little while. When I get back in full swing, perhaps we'll be hitting this every single day again. But until such time, keep being you and keep supporting voices that represent what you represent. That's all I got the time for today. Love you, mean it. See you next time.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.